This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, ultraviolet and infrared light from the unseen spectrum of light, Kara Shimborski.
Hey.
And Nick White.
Don't bring 8th grade earth science into this.
Okay, all right, yeah. Well, thank you both for joining me this week for I Read Comic Books. I'm very excited to talk about comic books with you. But before we get too deep into things, I want to remind everybody that we have a hangout coming up on February 19th, this upcoming Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. Be there. Don't be square. Bring a friend. Come chat about comics with us. Our last hangout was absolutely incredible. I can't wait for this next one just because we got a good bunch of human beings on this server on our Discord, and it's just amazing. Get a link to the Discord in our show notes. If that doesn't work, send me an email at ircbpodcast@gmail.com, and I will send you a personalized invitation with a full-blown explanation as to why things are and not working from that invite in our show notes, and I'll get it fixed. But anyways, let's talk about comic books. That's what we're here to do. I have two legally mandated questions that I need to ask, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Nick.
Yeah, I guess West Michigan weather watch would be the last couple days. We sort of got into the 40s and the snow started melting, and which is great because then you get to see all these puddles appear, and then you look at the weather forecast and it's like, it's going to be like 12 tomorrow. And then you're like, okay, so everything's going to freeze and I don't need to go outside, which was the plan anyway. So it doesn't really change that much for me.
Nick, it's okay to go outside. Get some vitamin D in your life, please.
I mean, okay, fine.
Go outside, Nick.
I'll put it back on my Google Calendar. All right.
As the people on TikTok say to roast each other, go outside, touch some grass. Like,
What?
That's right, what they say.
Yeah.
They say, touch some grass.
It makes me so sad that I understand that. It makes me more sad that TikTok is now like the knowledge center of, all things great. So, but this is just me on the porch in my chair, rocking back and forth and telling the kids to get out of the lawn. So here we are.
Great.
In terms of what I've been reading, I did read Apache Delivery Service number 2. This is written by Matt Kint, art and letters by Tyler Jenkins, colors by Hillary Jenkins. If this team sounds familiar, it's also because this art team last got together in early 2021 for Fear Case, a book with some curious and kind of tenuous in-universe ties to Kint's previous work, Bang. I'm very interested to see if this book also seems to sort of coexist in the same universe. It's like very brief mentions and things like that at this point, almost like I'm not a huge Kevin Smith fan. Sorry, everyone. But like he has that obsession with that, what do they call it? Like the Movieverse or whatever, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like occasionally one character shows up in one thing and then it shows up in the other thing. And you're like, oh, everything is sort of interconnected. Like it's that very surface level at this point, but I do wonder if that's going to change. Also, want to point out about this book, I think it's super, super cool that not only does this book have a cultural consultant, but it also has a sensitivity consultant, and both of them are on the credits page. Probably less cool is going to be me butchering their names, but I'm about to do it. The cultural consultant is Michael Shea. Sorry, Michael. And the sensitivity consultant is Asby Whitecalf or Whitcalf, and hopefully it's one of the two and not a third option. But that's great.
Could you tell me a little bit about what this book is about? Because I think you've talked about it, but I actually don't know what this series is.
Right, and that's kind of a more complicated thing, which I guess I'll just get into right now. So that's a good segue. If you were reading the solicits for this book, it was sort of pitched as kind of a rip-roaring treasure hunt right at the height of the Vietnam War, as these two characters, one of which who is Native American, but not Apache, as everyone in his troop or regiment or whatever seems to think he is, and another character that we come to meet go on this rip-roaring treasure hunt during this period and end up deep in these caves and caverns of Vietnam where there may or may not be witches and other spooky things. And like that's the solicit, but having read the first 2 issues, and I think this is actually better, it's much more of a slow burn character build at this point. And within these first 2 issues, you have these 2 treasure hunters kind of coming together. or rather setting off on this treasure hunt, one of which is this American soldier. And he's being told by this other guy who learned about this legend about this secret Nazi gold hidden on this island by a Japanese general. He sort of weaves the story of how the gold, how he learned this narrative and how the gold ended up where it was. And it's really well done because you sort of have this silent juxtaposition between this prose that you're reading, this narrative about the gold, but it's intercut with these images around this guy's house. Like you see parts of his house or things in his yard or things on his shelves that don't seem to agree with the story he's telling to the other character. And so you're like, this is kind of fucked up. Like there's this real disconnect, this real discord there. And if you read the issue, I think you'll see that tension too. Like, I'm not so sure we can trust this guy. Or it's the whole, I haven't seen the movie, right? But there's a whole Usual Suspects thing where it's like, oh, Kaiser Sosa did this, Kaiser Sosa did that. And you realize, oh shit, he's Kaiser Sosa. It's got that same vibe going on.
Spoilers, Nick, damn.
Well, what is that movie, like 30? Plus, no one needs to see it. No one needs to see a Kevin Spacey movie.
There's many people that could be Kaiser Sosa in the movie, okay?
Wait. So okay. This whole time that Nick has been describing this book, I'm like, didn't Netflix just make this? And then I realized that while Nick was describing this book, I was thinking that it was the Five Bloods. But I guess every Army, Vietnam, treasure hunt related concept, I'm just like, but we did that already.
Well, I mean, I think the key difference here is that there's no witches into Five Bloods, which I
don't know that. I haven't seen it.
Okay, well, as someone who has watched it, I can definitely assure you that Spike Lee did not put witches into that movie.
But should he have?
I mean, this is not a movie podcast. Otherwise, I'd go deep in on that, okay?
Yeah, so I don't know. Does Zander need to cut out the spoilers for a, 30-year-old film?
No, Nick, I'm just being an asshole. Move on.
I don't know. People are weird these days. Like, you bring up a movie from 40 years ago and they're like, I was gonna watch that next month or something. Anyway, I don't know.
You still didn't reveal who Kaiser Soze was. It's fine. Let's just go.
It's fine. Treasure hunting.
The fact that I haven't even seen the movie just makes it so much better. It's it's just one of those pop culture peripheral things.
It's like, are you a human being on the internet? Yes, then you know things about stuff.
I mean, we say these things, but I accidentally ruined Star Wars in my sophomore year of college to my roommate's girlfriend. She's like, well, I'm so excited to watch the movie. And I'm like, are you really? Like, we all know, Darth Vader, I am your father, Nick, blah, blah, blah. She's like, what?
Nick, no. So, see, this is why with some spoiler stuff, I'm like, don't do that thing, because the purest video I've ever seen in my life is that video of that girl watching Lord of the Rings for the first time. And she gets to the scene where Merry and Pippin are in the woods and they're being taken to the White Wizard and they think they're about to die, and she just flips the fuck out, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. So that's why I was even things that have been out for a while, I'm like, no, somebody's gonna see that for the first time at some point. Let them go in. Don't be the person that ruins it for them. Anyway, I digress.
Usual Suspects is not that movie, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
I just want to make sure that's.
All I'm saying is there are still people out there who haven't seen Star Wars, although I think most of them at this point now have deeply embedded not seeing Star Wars as part of their cultural identity that they flaunt, and they deserve to have it spoiled for them. So,
you know, that's fair, Nick. I'll join you on that hill to die on.
I will briefly also say I did read Hellboy in the B.P.R.D. 1957 Forgotten Lives. Yes, that is the title. They are titling these issues very weird at this point. This is written by Mike Mignola and Chris Roberson, who of iZombie fame. Art by Stephen Green, colors by Dave Stewart, letters by Clem Robbins. The gang's back again. It's sort of a weird feeling to have this title be my pick of the week last week, and then I'm on the show this week, And then I'm like, dear class, I did indeed read the book as I promised I was going to. So this basically feels like a book report now.
Nick, that's me on every show. On every show, I'm like, I listed this book on my what are you reading this week list, and here I am.
Danny says we love a continuity, so we'll keep it. It's good. Continuity is good.
True to my word, I did read the book I said I would. Stephen Green, who did the art here, perhaps most recently known for drawing the Black Sun arc of Hellboy and the B.P.R.D. in 1952. He's also currently drawing the book Sea of Stars at Image Comics, which is written by Dennis Hallam and Jason Aaron. It's a really, really interesting art style. It's not a massive departure from Mike Mignola himself and sort of the stable of artists that are sort of aesthetically or tonally Mignola adjacent, I guess you could say, like Christopher Mitten or Ben Stenbeck. As I wrote in my notes, Mignola helmed books sometimes feel like watching Christopher Nolan movies. You're going to see the same faces cropping up over and over again. But there's a real stylized, painterly exaggeration to the characters. Professor Brutenholm's hair seems to break the laws of physics even more than it normally does. The right hand of Doom now looks like the size of several city blocks, but it's interesting and fun. Considering that this is a one-shot, and it's a normal-sized one-shot, like 23 pages, it somehow manages to do a little bit of everything. There's some lore and in-universe references and content for the fans who want it. But it's also sort of a story that's like sentimental and not real saccharine. It has to do with the Potter's Field on Hart Island in the Bronx, which apparently is a real thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Apparently over 1 million people are buried there and are still being buried there, who are, indigent or exactly, or unclaimed or whatever. Somewhere. So it was interesting to learn some of the real history that they intersected into this book because of that. And they're having a problem because there's a haunting going on that's disrupting the future burial of more people. And Brutenholm and Hellboy are brought in to investigate. It's got some Lobster Johnson lore going on here, which is interesting. But ultimately, it sort of embraces that Hellboy mentality of like ghosts have needs too. Like they're not always like, oh, we got to wrangle this ghost and it's evil and then whatever. Hellboy's always kind of had that mentality of like, what do we need to do to make the ghost go away or have its needs met,
This is the Wally West Flash mentality of fighting crime. Criminals are people too. What can we do to make sure they're rehabilitated instead of incarcerated?
Exactly. And I put in my notes, while Ray Parker Jr. posited that bustin' makes me feel good, it's a selfish attitude that doesn't address the ghost's actual problems.
Oh my God, Nick.
What the fuck, Nick? That's gonna be entitled the episode. Bustin' makes me feel good. Thank you.
I don't think it can be. I don't think that's. I think that's a bad idea.
Listen, this is a visual arts categorized comics, so or podcast, so we can do whatever we want.
Anyways, it is a song from a film soundtrack. Okay, it is a lyric from a song from a film soundtrack. There's nothing inherently chaotic about that.
Nick, we can't fit that into the title of an episode. It's okay.
Yeah. Any last thoughts about Hellboy and the B.P.R.D. 1957?
No, that's it.
Lives? Okay. Kara, how about you? How have you been? How have comic books been? Have you read anything interesting recently?
Oh boy, Mike. Well, you know what? Okay, so few things that I want to like touch back on, going back in time through what we've spoken about already today. First of all, the Discord hangout. Everyone should definitely come. Last time we all just ended up yelling about owls, and it was great. They're the dumbest birds, and I love them so much. Other Star Wars related things. While you were all talking about Star Wars, one of my friends texted me that there's Muppet Star Wars action figures, and I have never been more delighted to know something exists. I have to do some further investigation, but Muppet Star Wars, the plastic interpretations of those are a thing. Also, it's my birthday this week, so if you see those, I would like those things, please. Thank you.
You can. We'll put a PO box in the show notes, and we'll make sure they get to Kara in some way or shape or form.
So that's why we're recording a day early, because I needed to move it for birthday festivities. So thank you all for being part of this celebration with me.
Plus, after this recording later tonight, we're going to be watching Twilight Eclipse as a family. The IRCB family's getting together to watch Twilight 3 for some reason. As voted on by all of us. I know, we all voted on it.
Well, actually what happened is I made a poll of nerdy properties that I thought would make for good group watches, because you don't have to really think about them, and if you yell over them, nobody gets upset. And then I put a Twilight movie as one of the options. And then Tia helped persuade everyone to vote for Twilight. And that's when I snuck in and said, and the one we're watching is Eclipse. The one we're watching is Eclipse. I'm excited. I only watch the Twilight movies in a group watch setting. Like, I've never just sat down and watched them by myself, because they're so much fun to watch with people, because the whole time you're just like, what is happening and why? So I'm excited for that. I will talk about a Twilight comic related thing a little bit later in this episode. But speaking of romance, vampiric or otherwise, the comic that I read this week that I want to talk about is Archie's Valentine Spectacular #1, which is a new comic book out from Archie Comics. And when I say new, with the majority of Archie comic books, what they're doing is they'll have a new story to lead the issue or the digest collection. And then everything else is an older story that's being used again. But it works because they have such an enormous back catalog, and very few of the stories actually rely on any kind of continuity, that you can just do that. So you can pick up an Archie collection and be reading stories from like the 50s to now in it, which I've always liked about that publisher. Anyway, so I love holidays. I love themes. So of course I was going to pick up a Valentine Spectacular, especially because the new story that they wrote for it is one in which Archie is the dude who broke Taylor Swift's heart and launched her career.
No. Normally I'd say what, but I've at least read 100 pages of Archie to a point where I just look at all of these things and just nod and go, yeah, okay.
But that's what I love about this publisher, because they can make any situation work, and you're just like, I buy that. So,
I'm just waiting for like a couple months. We're like, did you read the one where Archie kills JFK? And it's like, what? Except that's not the right reaction. It would be, did you hear it's the one where Archie kills JFK? And you're like, all right.
So, that makes sense. That makes sense.
So, okay, so it's not Taylor Swift. Her name is Taylor Sweet. But, you know, it's Taylor Swift. It's this blonde singer-songwriter with an acoustic guitar singing about my gingerbread boy.
No.
Well, I mean, when you think about the Archies, right? Like, Archie's always had, you know this way more than me, there's been a real interesting intersection with real music artists within the last couple years, in the last couple decades.
That's
Archie
amazing.
meets insert band, right?
It's just extra perfect because this week there was also a new Taylor Swift song that was released that she did in collaboration with Ed Sheeran, who is a ginger. So I'm just like, I don't think they planned that, but I love it so much.
Can you just address him by his real title, Game of Thrones star Ed Sheeran, please?
Yeah, please.
Show him some respect.
Oh my god. So, and it's just great because Archie is just like mad in the whole issue, because it's like the girls love the song. They're just like, oh my god, we love Taylor Swift so much. And he's just like fuming. And then he's in the car with Jughead, and the song comes on the radio, and he's like, turn that shit off, except for children. And Jughead is like,
turn that conflaget thing off.
Like,
turn that insert wingding symbols off. Yeah,
so Jughead's like, what is wrong with you, dude? And Archie's like, Jughead, you can't tell anyone, but I'm gingerbread boy.
I am the gingerbread boy.
And
amazing.
Like, I just love everything about this so much. And it's actually, the more you think about it, it's such a good plot concept that I really wish they would just expand this into a graphic novel and get Taylor Swift to like co-sign it. Like, really, that is what that is what I want from this. Anyway, so there's like a few more stories in this issue, and definitely my favorite one is the one where like the girls in the school are all obsessed with this romance story that's being released in like a women's magazine, so they have to wait every month to get the next chapter of the story. And I'm like, what is this, the Strand? Are we reading Sherlock Holmes in the 1890s? But you know, and they find out that the author of this story that they love so much is Miss Grundy. And
no way.
And the best part, like, I'm just going to go against everything I just said about spoilers because I know the majority of you are not going to read this, but the issue ends with Miss Grundy being like, I made so much money off my novel, I'm going to go take a European vacation. And the girl and Betty and Veronica are like hanging out at home saying, gosh, I hope Miss Grundy's having fun on her vacation, but I think she's a better romance writer than she is experiencing romance in real life. And then they get an email from Miss Grundy, and it's a picture of her with like a person who is clearly supposed to be Fabio in front of the Eiffel Tower. Betty and Veronica are like, oh, maybe we could learn a thing or two from Miss Grundy. And I'm like, yes!
No way.
Yes! Oh.
Wow. That is something. Oh my gosh.
Something. So it was just great. Just if you ever need a laugh, pick up an Archie comic. You won't be disappointed. And then the other comic that I read this week is going to make me sound like a jerk because I'm like, this is actually a comic online that is in French and not translated in English, so you can't enjoy it. But I do want to share very briefly one of my favorite French comic creators, Margot Martin. She posts comics and like little like short sequences to her Instagram account all the time. And it's a great way for me to practice my French because I don't use French every day. And seeing words in a comic format is helpful because you have visual context for what's going on. And over the past like week or so, she's been posting a series of comics about like how can you tell if you're a little OCD about cleaning your house. And it's like every picture on her Instagram that you like swipe through, so there's like 5 in each post that you go through sequentially. So I am going to go ahead and call this a comic, even though I guess technically each box would be more of a cartoon. And it's all this ridiculous stuff where you're supposed to, it's like there's like a little caption of the thing that you do to neurotically clean your house. And she has like a little point system so you can track your points to know exactly how neurotic you are while cleaning your house. And it's very clear that like she does all these things, so she's just trying to be like, I know I'm ridiculous, but how many of you are ridiculous with me? So there's like all these panels like, do you have multiple brooms? Do you have a favorite brush? Do you clean your cleaning items? So she says like, I have a horror of the soap that coagulates on the soap dispenser, so I clean my soap dispenser. And I'm just like, my favorite one is the one where it's just like, so electrical outlets in France have much larger openings than the electrical outlets in the US. The US, it's like these 2 little parallel lines, and in France, it's more like these big circles. And so there's like an illustration of her like digging into the circles of the electrical outlet with the end of a Q-tip so she can get the dust out of it.
No.
What?
I'm like, this is a different level, but it just like the illustrations are so charming that I have been greatly enjoying the entire sequence.
Wow.
This sounds dangerous, Kara. Blink twice if you're not okay.
Fine. I didn't do any of those cleaning things, Mike. This is the artist. And then I guess my other comics related thing that's only loosely tangentially related to comics is I finally got caught up on Riverdale after letting that lapse for like a year because I'm like, God, this show is so bad. Like I can't even recommend it as a hate watch. It's just bad. And then I got caught up and I'm really mad because season 5 was actually good and the start of season 6 is insane. And I was just like, oh, this is where the payoff comes from slogging through like 3 seasons of mediocrity in the middle. But
oh boy.
But I just like, I cannot recommend this series to anyone because I don't want to say season 1 is great, everything else is trash. But if you enjoy ridiculous trash. Some things are good, but you have to watch everything to know what's going on. And there's like no stakes and nothing matters and weird shit happens. And the reason why season 5 started being good for me is because it's almost like the writers looked back at the previous 3 seasons and said, hey, remember that weird thing that we did that confused everybody and we never resolved it? Let's bring that back. So there was like a lot of let's just double down on being ridiculous that I appreciated. But then like going back in and reading an Archie comic in contrast with Riverdale, like in this Valentine special that I read, there's a few like moments in one of the stories where Mr. Lodge comes out to like get Archie away from Veronica because that's always their dynamic. And in Riverdale, the show, Mr. Lodge is like a mob boss who's like murdering people. And in the comics, he's more like slapstick comedy. And I had like completely forgotten about that because I was just so in this Riverdale hole that looking at an actual Archie comic and remembering that Mr. Lodge is at his best when he's just like trying to remove a ladder from under Archie while he's trying to scale to a balcony where Veronica is like much funnier than him holding a gun to somebody's head. So I am just loving this journey overall for me.
I am so glad that you kept on that train eventually, because I am, and I'm not saying that you should do this, but I am thinking with the insanity that was, I've heard, from what I understand, season 5 and I guess season 6 of like Jughead goes to war and all this other shit, or Archie goes, I don't remember who went to war. Someone went into the army and came back like all messed up.
Archie
right?
went to war. Jughead became like an alcoholic writer, and everybody ends up back in Riverdale because all of the teachers are gone from the school. So all the kids have to come back and teach at Riverdale High, which is how they can be in their late 20s and still in high school.
Okay, so all I'm saying is maybe you should bring back that Medium series, that you did for a little while. No pressure. No pressure.
It will just be me yelling, "Why is this happening? Here's some more glitter."
That's perfectly fine.
Well,
you know what?
Because what I wanted to do with the series of blogs that I was doing was write about, okay, how does this work in relation to the comics? And at this point,
right.
It isn't. Like there is nothing relating it back to the comics, except one of the most recent episodes from season 6. They do a lot of it. The first like 5 episodes of season 6 were this special called River Vale. And I don't want to spoil it because you should actually watch it even if you've never seen an episode of Riverdale, because each episode is it's kind of like a horror anthology where each episode is a different like horror trope that tells like a self-contained story. And then in the 5th episode, you like kind of see how they're all tied together, but basically it's just insane. And you're like, oh, this is the writers just doing the thing that comic book writers do, where they're just like, and anyway, here's a pocket universe over here.
Just for fun.
It's fine. We're just going to write our way out of this. Don't worry about it. But there is a sequence that does have like the gang in a comic book store where they're like reading Archie comics. And it's like this weird meta moment that I really enjoyed. But aside from that, there's no relation to the comics at this point.
Okay. Well, for me,
how about you, Mike?
This week, I've been playing Pokemon and trying to read comics. I don't know. Time just seems to get away from me. Isn't that how it is for all of us? But yeah,
Mike's gonna have to get one of those cabinets with a lock so that Kelly can put his Nintendo Switch in it, and then leave out notes that say like no Pokemon until chores are done or something like that. Like
it's just so fun. That Pokemon Arceus game is it's so addicting to just be like, I'm gonna go catch 15 Pokemon right now just for fun. You don't have to grind for it. You can just go do it. But yeah, when I'm not doing that, I did read a couple of comics. I sat down and read Once and Future number 19 through 24 to catch myself up. This is Kieran Gillen and Dan Mora. The moral of this entire story is this story is all about stories, and the only reason that things can exist in the world of magic is because there is story around them. Or at least in this world, and the way that you can enact different things and set up different laws and rules that people have to abide by is because of, Arthurian lore and stories that come with it. I don't want to necessarily talk about the individual issues, though I did think there was a funny little bit that he did with William Shakespeare that I was like, I don't really know much about Shakespeare, but I know this one thing, and the fact that he twisted it was really fun. Overall, this series is super explosive. Like, every page is bursting with action, and I really appreciate that, especially in this later arc where some things have changed about the world, and so you have to kind of play around with all of that. And the main characters of this story are consistent to themselves throughout. Like, there is growth, but at the same time the character dynamic is there, and you'd think that like the mismatch of stories on stories thing would get old after 24 issues, but the more I read of the series, the more compelling it all seems to be as myth bleeds into reality, especially with these last 5 issues where things have been building for a long time to kind of a war of some kind, which is kind of what a lot of bigger comics do. You end up with your Walking Deads or your, I don't know, Power Rangers, where it's just like the war of the blank or whatever it ends up being. But this, I feel like, is intentional. And I think that the end, in the sense that in the end of this issue, especially 24, there is a hard left turn that Gillen takes that I was like, oh, so it's more of the same shit, but because you've introduced this new element, it changes everything. And adds like an infinite level of chaos to the whole story. So I really appreciate that. Like, and on the surface, go ahead.
I was gonna say, Once in Future might be my favorite ongoing right now because it's just
so
fun. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. You can tell that the creators are having a blast, and it just feels like borderline pulpy and campy, but in a really intellectual way.
Yeah, like I was just gonna say, the whole story is steeped in this, like, you've got to know Arthurian lore and myth and all this other stuff, but you don't. I think Gillen, in a lot of his writing, sometimes you when you read the first issue of something, you go, oh fuck, this is going to be way over my head. And in some of his writing, it definitely is, right? But I think in this book, he's found a way to approach something that I think a lot of people in Western culture understand, the idea of King Arthur and his round table, and taking the actual folklore of it and weaving it into the story and explaining it to us through the character of, I think his name is Duncan, who doesn't know all of the stories because his grandma intentionally did not tell him these things for reasons that are story driven. So I think as we're learning about things, Gillen is able to just weave the story into the actual fiction of the world. And yeah, it doesn't feel like heady. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be smarter than you. It's taking like what is academic in a lot of ways and making it part of a narrative that becomes compelling every single issue. And the more you learn, the more excited the story becomes. At least for me as a reader, I get more excited reading it. So yeah, it's really great. Like, because like on the surface, like if you'd have told me what this book was about, I don't think I normally would have picked it up. Like if you didn't give me the creators on this and just said, hey, it's a story about fantasy, blah, 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 Arthurian, I'd have been like, yeah, okay, it sounds really boring. But Gillen and Mora, like, they smash together all of the fun fantasy, dark comedy, and somehow the imagery of like superheroics all into this one book. And I especially think like the last couple of issues, maybe the last like dozen issues, where we started to see more characters and I'm trying to tiptoe around spoilers here, like as people have come into prominence in the story, you can tell that Dan Mora was like, well, what if we took that character who would normally be clad in this and make it look like a superhero costume, but it's not a superhero costume because it's practical in X, Y, and Z. And I've really appreciated the way that they've styled everything in this book to make it feel like a modern comic book, but still have its ties back to all the like, medieval Arthurian stuff. So yeah, Once in Future is great, guys. Everybody should read that book. It's pretty fun. Plus, Dan Mora is incredible. Like, as an artist, I feel like everything I've read that he's drawn, I've been just super sucked into because his art style is amazing. Like, World's Finest is a book that he's on pretty soon, and he's done all the Klaus books. He's doing this book, and I'm just like, man, what can't this guy do? He's really, really impressive. The one other book I do want to talk about, and I got to get on a soapbox here because I was really blown away by this issue. This is New Mutants number 24, written by Vita Ayala, art by Danilo Beyruth, colors by Dan Brown, letters by Travis Lanham. New Mutants is the only book that is actually an X-Men book about life on Krakoa, as far as I'm concerned. The rest of the X-Men books are about the life caused by Krakoa, this Krakoan like utopia that was created as part of the House of X Powers of X thing. And Vita Ayala has been given the chance to write a story about the teenagers and the people who are living on Krakoa and what their life is like. And the thing that I really appreciated about this particular issue is that while it was really, really wordy, there was a moment in the issue that focused on the idea of rehabilitation. And I don't think that comic books talk about this enough. Like we take this idea of when a supervillain gets caught, we just throw them in the clink and throw away the key, and they're never going to get out there, a menace to society, blah, blah, blah. And one of the core tenets of the House of X, Powers of 10, Krakoan utopia, like the ideal utopia, is that Professor X, with the exception of Sabretooth, and we're discovering what the ramifications are of that in the Sabretooth story, like no one has really gone to quote unquote jail, right? You don't get put in jail, or you don't get severely punished in terms of corporal punishment. Jeez, oh Pete's. You don't get punished in that way on Krakoa. If you do something that goes against the laws of Krakoa, you are rehabilitated, or you are, people work with you to try to figure out why you've done the things that you've done. And I'm probably oversimplifying it, but the thing that really struck me about this is the Krakoan world is not perfect, right? The X-Men living in this utopia is fake, but they are still provided with, unlimited medicine and housing and all of the things that I think we strive for in modern society to try to better all of the people that live in it. And I think that the House of X, Powers of 10 hinted at all of this stuff when Hickman kind of created this world that this is a perfect utopia where people will want for nothing, but in a way that still allows them to explore themselves and do what they want and try things and experiment and, love who they want to love and have informed relationships however they want, to the point where we see like Cyclops and Wolverine and Jean Grey in this like throuple type of situation. But there's also been mentions throughout this book of people having children and then just kind of leaving the kids, but not in a way that's like abandoning them for like, foster care or whatever that happens in the United States. Instead, leaving them to a community of people who are like, I want to raise children, and so we will raise children as part of a village. But people are allowed to just procreate and not have to take that responsibility onto themselves. And it's like a different way to look at the way that we handle things in general. But the thing, and all of this has been touched upon in the New Mutants book, which I think has been interesting. But the thing that really got me is about this whole issue, and I'm going to say full spoilers for New Mutants 23 and parts of 24. If you haven't read it yet, press pause, go read it, come back. But this issue focused on the rehabilitation of the Shadow King, a.k.a. Amal Farouk. He's a dude that's been a villain for a really, really long time. And there was a moment where all of the characters who have had issues with him in the past and in the most recent arc of the story got a moment to speak to him and say, I forgive you. Or they chose to say, I don't forgive you. But all of them came together to say, we all hope that you can become the person that we know that you could be to better all of mutants, to better our society. So they took him away from Krakoa. He's now living on Mars with in Araco, which is where all of the other mutants are living, to basically find himself and understand and atone for all of the things that he's done, but not putting him in jail, not removing his freedoms, not saying that you have to sit in this box and you have to be regulated and all this stuff, but he's going somewhere to better himself in order to re-enter the utopian society. And I really appreciated that Ayala decided to focus on that for a few pages in this issue, because it's important, I think, to see that type of story reflected if we're going to talk about a future world where something like prisons are abolished, where we get rid of this idea of having to put people in boxes just because they did a quote unquote bad thing, whatever that bad thing may be. And I know that there's levels here and we can get into the granularity of it, but ultimately rehabilitation is the goal. And I don't think that, our current prison system does that very well. And I love that Ayala was like, in this utopian world, why would they put him in a box? Why wouldn't they just send him to a place where he could rehabilitate in a way that is positive, without removing his freedoms and just basically destroying his life, with the understanding that every single character there was saying, we know that you've done wrong in the past, but we know that there's a future where you can atone for those things and you can come back and be a part of our society in a way that is meaningful. So yeah, I don't know if that was the point of this issue, but I fucking really appreciated it.
Mike, how many times have the X-Men been in some kind of utopia? Because I feel like this is a recurring theme for them, but I don't read enough to know if it's actually a recurring theme.
They've tried many times, right? Like there was the Utopia X thing that they did where they took Magneto's comet or rocket, or not comet, asteroid that was like going around the Earth and like smashed it into the ocean and lived on top of that for a little while. But like
What?
that was built on like, yeah, there was a whole thing where they were like, yeah, we're going to live in San Francisco. And then
Oh my
California was like,
God.
hey, fuck you, mutants. And they're like, we're going to go live in the ocean just off of the coast. And it was a whole problem. But that these utopias were never with like the understanding of let's bring everybody into the fold to try to create a solid place for all mutants, right? Like never before have we seen, at least to my knowledge, a place where all of the villains as well as all of the heroes have come together to say we are trying to better our people, right? In the past, it was always like, oh, the Professor Xavier's school was like the utopia, or Utopia X, where we all lived on this thing. Yeah, we had some of the villains and some of the heroes and all that stuff living together, but there was schisms constantly. No one could agree on who was going to lead and how they were going to lead. And instead, there's like this parliament style leadership that exists on Krakoa. Like, again, I think Hickman saw all of the history of the thing in the X offices, you know, when they put all this together, saw the history of the X-Men and said, what would an actual utopia in a good natured world look like for these characters? And that's what they tried for with this. And I think they've done a good job, because I mean, we've been reading this for 2+ years, and there have been hiccups. Like there has to be drama in order for the stories to continue. But I think like the New Mutants book shows that there is a life beyond just those instances, and we can still come back to be regular humans and people together.
I have an X-Men sidebar. Did I hallucinate that you recommended a series called Hellions?
I definitely did.
Okay.
Yes.
So I tried to search for it at my library, and I did not like think, oh, Hellion is also a word. It's not just an X book title. Allow me to read to you a selection of titles that include the word Hellion in my local library. We have The Hellion Bride, The Lady Hellion, The Hellion's Waltz. All of these are very clearly romance covers with women in really luscious looking dresses. The Hellion and the Highlander, that one has a shirtless man. And then there's a Hellion in Her Bed, which is a partially shirtless man, but he's wearing a flouncy blouse. Anyways, that's what I want to see in a series called Hellions. I just want like the X-Men, but in flouncy blouses.
I was waiting for Kara to be like, anyway, I checked all of those out. Haven't started the comic yet.
None of them are X-Men books. Let us know how that goes with those books, and check, let us know next time you're on the show. But anyways, I thank you guys for letting me get on my soapbox there. I love that issue, and I can't speak about how great it was. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about our commissioned episode. This is from our good buddy Jeff, who backed us at our $10 tier on Patreon, and we've got a great episode topic for today. So we'll be back in just a second. Before we get into this week's topic, I realized that we 100% skipped over top of my pile. We did not say what we were excited for. And you know what? Quite honestly, maybe we shouldn't. But I feel bad. I'm blaming it on the 3 beers that I had last night. So I'm going to pass things over to Kara. Tell me what is on the top of your pile. What are you excited to read next?
Okay, this is 100% because I'm making you all watch Twilight Eclipse with me later. But I actually want to read the Twilight graphic novel, and I know I just lost the majority of our audience, but bear with me here. This comic is not for you. This comic is for the people who don't read comics, because looking at the Amazon reviews for Twilight the graphic novel, it's not comic people. It's people who are like, I read the book and I was really excited to see that there was another interpretation of it, and I saw the film. And so them all like comparing this graphic novel to the novel itself and to the movies. And the majority of these reviewers, again, are not people who read comics normally. So, I started my notes for this kind of with a bit of mean-spiritedness, where I was just like, oh my God, these reviews are so funny. They're talking about how some of the art is realistic and some of it is cartoony. And I'm like, well, yeah, because if you don't talk about a medium and you don't have the vocabulary for it, you're going to use looser language to describe what you're seeing. But a lot of the reviews were also just like, oh, I bought this book for my 8 or 10-year-olds and they really liked it, and then their younger siblings really liked it, and my 3-year-old flips through it because they like the pictures. And I'm like, yes, that's how I started reading Batman. So it just really appealed to me that even if this comic, which is done in a manga style, like even if I actually read it and I'm like, well, the plot of Twilight is dumb anyway, so I'm not going to like it. Or if I'm like, well, this manga style like isn't really working for me, even if I go in and am like a super snob about it, I have to accept that this is perhaps the only interaction with a comic book that a lot of the people who read it have. So I do think there's value in looking at books like that and saying, what is the average non-nerd person experiencing when they experience something they understand to be a comic or a graphic novel? This is billed as a graphic novel. It's clearly done in like a manga style and a manga format, but like that's the language that the average consumer understands to be the book has pictures that will tell me a story sequentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then super quick, the other book that I want to take a look at that I just randomly saw on Amazon is called Cook Korean by Robin Ha. And it is like, this popped up on my search results because I was looking at the Porkcraft cookbook, which comes out next month, which is a Spike Trotman project that was crowdfunded by, I forget what service, but it's not Kickstarter. And
they're just doing it on their website, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, so the idea of having a comic book cookbook is so fascinating to me because I'm like, at what point, like, does your book have a plot? Does it have character development, or is it just like a cookbook with illustrations? But for the book Cook Korean, it has almost 1,000 reviews and it has a 5-star rating. So like something in it is clearly good and engaging.
Okay.
So I'd like to check that out and see what's going on there. And those
Very
are the
cool.
things that I'm excited for.
Amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And for getting through that quickly, I guess. We got so much to say in this week's topic because, Jeff, we promised we're going to get to it. But Nick, what about you? What are you excited for next?
Well, briefly, to add on to Kara, I don't know if you've read the comic. I think it's called To Eat and to Drink is the title. There's 2 volumes of it. It's a French comic that's been translated, and it's great for people who like eating but don't like cooking, for people who do like cooking, for people who are new to cooking, for people who are just interested in the world of food. And maybe I've got that title wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's To Eat and to Drink. And the first 2 volumes are on Comixology Unlimited. The third is on the way. So you might enjoy that.
To Drink and to Eat, Tastes and Techniques from a French Kitchen.
Okay, so I just had it flipped.
Forge.
That's exactly right. So
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And that, readers take that recommendation as well. I've read the first volume, really enjoyed it. For me, it's got to be Undiscovered Country, Volume 3 this week. This is from Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, writing Giuseppe Camuncoli and Leonardo Marcello Grassi on art, Matt Wilson on colors, Crank on letters. Yeah, I have to admit, I'm not the hugest Scott Snyder fan these days. I haven't really started Nocterra. I'm not really reading anything else he's doing, but I have enjoyed the first 2 volumes of the series. The solicit for this volume reads, the journey through the transformed United States continues as a group of explorers ventures into the third zone, Possibility, a region built on the endlessly evolving landscape of American creativity. From folklore to VR, the team will encounter bizarre transformations and amalgamations of the nation's greatest cultural achievements as they try to survive long enough to tell a story of their own. It's been interesting to have books like this, Undiscovered Country, and the Department of Truth kind of coming out alongside the events of like the 2020 election and the COVID-19 epidemic. So for those who are unaware, Department of Truth launched in September of 2020, pretty deep into everything. And all but the first 3 issues of Undiscovered Country have come out since COVID was a widely known thing. So it's sort of interesting to, especially when you realize that Tinian was sort of, well, Snyder was the mentor of Tinian, and I'm not saying there's like some deep-seated connection there, but it's interesting that the 2 of them sort of landed on kind of adjacent ideas at the exact same time, sort of exploring like, what is America right now? Where are we headed? Like, what are the multitudes of like futures that potentially await America, and where are we going in terms of that? That's what a weird, stupid blanket statement, Nick. But I think you know what I mean. Both are exploring the possibility of America, right? And so in that regard, I'm very excited for this volume, even if people at the beginning of like the series were like, you got to read volume 1. And I'm like, volume 1 is about a fucking plague. I'm not reading that book. And they're like, it's not totally about a plague. And I was like, what is that? Is that your fucking poll quote? Like, is that your poll quote? It's not totally about a plague. Comics Beat or something like that, you know?
God.
Anyway, sorry, Comics Beat. I don't think you said that about this book, but very excited.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it so far. Yeah.
Maybe I have to pick that up because I didn't realize that that's what this book was even about. So I saw it as like Snyder and Soul, which meant that it was going to be loved by fanboys and probably mediocre. But if you're saying that it's good, maybe I'll check it out.
And your fears and reasons that you did not initially read it are the exact reasons that I also did not read it for a while.
Yeah.
So I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah. Well, for me, really quick, I guess before I get into mine, we're hanging out with Danny on the Discord. Remember, you can always join us on Sundays at 1 p.m. Typically, we're recording on Saturday because of Kara's birthday, but typically Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. You can listen to these episodes live and chat along with us as we record. Danny's hanging out with us, and his pick this week is Primordial, number 1 through 6. I think he's finally getting into that Sorrentino Lemire joint that people have been... we've been talking about quite a bit on our Discord because a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about that, myself included. But the book I'm excited for this upcoming week is Iron Fist number 1. This is by Alyssa Wong on writing, Michael YG on art, colors by J. David Ramos. And this is a mini-series about a new Iron Fist. It sounds exciting. Like, who is the new Iron Fist? After giving up his power to save the world, Danny Rand believes he's seen the last of the Iron Fist. But when demons begin to attack cities around the world, classic Danny, a mysterious newcomer in a familiar mask appears, hands blazing with the chi of Shao Lao the Undying. Who is this new Iron Fist? And does his power really come from the Dragon of Kunlun? Or is something far more sinister? I don't know. It sounds cool. Alyssa Wong, I've heard great things about her writing. Willing to check this out. I always have a soft spot in my heart for Iron Fist ever since I read that Brubaker Fraction joint. Every time a new Iron Fist comes out, I always want to try it. I always want it to be that caliber of Danny Rand. So I'm excited to try this, if only just to see like what this miniseries is about. And really quick, I do want to mention I'm also excited for A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance, number 5. This is Rick Remender and Andrea Lima Arujo. This book, I don't want to talk about it. All I want to say is this is the most bizarre movie that I've ever read, because it is clearly a movie that Rick Remender has turned into a comic book. Like, if you like The Professional, you will like this book. That's the only way that I can think about it. Or Leon the Professional, you'll probably like this without the whole weird pedophilia thing that is in The Professional. That doesn't exist in this book, but it's got like that same weird, like everything is just slowly rolling forward and there's nothing you can do to stop the momentum of this story. For some reason, Leon the Professional is the first movie that came to mind, but I really like Righteous Thirst for Vengeance. I think it's pretty good. So anyways, we're going to move on. We talked about comics. I'm so glad that we did that. Now let's talk about Jeff's topic. It's a big one. So I'm going to read this blurb that Jeff sent over because this topic itself is not a simple one, but I think that all comics fans experience this. I think modern comics fans have this problem.
Mike,
yeah.
For our lovely listeners, how did Jeff get to pick the topic of this episode?
Yeah, so as I said before the break, Jeff is one of our $10 patrons. We have 12 slots open on the IRCB Patreon for folks that want to commission episodes. So if you head over to patreon.com/IRCB podcast, you can join. I think we have one slot left to commission an episode. We've got other people that we're waiting on commissioned episodes for. But if you sign up for that, I'll send you a form. You can fill out a thing. And then once we can fit it into the schedule, we'll record the episode. You get to pick the topic. You get to pick the folks that are on the episode. Maybe we'll have a little bit of a one-on-one chat in our Discord. We've got a special room for the $10 IRCB Inner Circle is what we call them. So make sure to go over to patreon.com/IRCB podcast. You can get all sorts of stuff back in at the $5 tier, but if you want to back us at the $10 tier, you can commission an episode of the show. So that's why we're here today, to talk about Jeff's big topic. And I'm going to read this big long blurb that he sent over to us because it's really good and it really it really describes the problem here that I think Jeff wants us to get into. And he said the challenge, or he wanted the topic to be the challenge of supporting the comic book industry in local economies is to acquire a physical good, i.e. you cannot purchase a digital product while supporting your local comic book shop. There was a way to get around that, but we'll talk about it. Where physical goods itself is a possible collectible, but almost certainly not. And that creates an artificial sense of scarcity. that this industry takes advantage of the FOMO, fear of missing out, and has devised a system in which you must acquire side stories and one-shots in order to have a sense of completed story. How can we as people who appreciate the medium of graphic storytelling also find the balance of not consuming while also supporting our local businesses? Bonus, if we can talk about how to get rid of the crap that I've bought, that we brought into our lives too. I literally don't know what the best way is to offload a bunch of long boxes, and it makes me a little sad. And so Jeff picked me and Nick and Kara to come on this episode, is to say, if you commission an episode, I don't have to be on it. If that's a thing that'll sell you on this thing, like, so be it.
I appreciate that Jeff's rationale for picking us, and I'm paraphrasing in the extreme here, is just like, I think these people will yell a lot about this thing, and he's right.
But I think that Jeff really brings up a point of what the lifelong comic book fan faces, right? It's a problem that I think go ahead. Yeah, I've been talking nonstop.
It's okay,
someone
Mike.
Else
so first of all, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, so let's get that right off our chests.
But that aside,
anyway, we're all sinners. Let's move on to part 2. Great.
Exactly. I just wanted to like zoom out, and now we can zoom back in, because this entire topic is hella granular. I struggle with this all the time. Like, I have a local comic shop. I've shopped there maybe twice in the past year. I get a lot of stuff from the library. I hate this, but I do it because it's cheapest to just get graphic novels on Amazon, especially if they're having a sale, or like when Barnes and Noble is having a sale, I'll pick stuff up then. Like, that's how I've been collecting the Hellboy library editions. And it's just like, I don't know. I get my comics where I get them. I read things on Hoopla. I just reserved that like French comic cookbook that Nick was talking about from my local library. It's like, I don't buy everything. I don't always get floppies. Sometimes I get digital. I went through a phase where I was like buying DRM free digital PDFs direct from publishers, and then them just getting like lost on my computer because I don't care enough to organize everything. So
hard to relate.
So I'll start with the bonus part of this question, because that's, I think, the easiest part to tackle of this, of like how to get rid of the crap that you've brought into our lives. May I direct you to the works of Marie Kondo, which is, we do have a collector mentality as comic book fans, because we've been trained to view these floppy issues as these almost like sacred objects, when originally, like, the reason why Golden Age stuff is so scarce, especially in good like quality, is because they were designed to be thrown out as soon as you read them. It's like a magazine, it's like a newspaper. And somehow over the decades we've gotten away from that, and we're just like, but I have to hold on to every book I've ever bought and keep it in my long boxes. And like, that's what it's like, dude, it's paper. You can recycle it, or you could donate it to a library, or like have a, like, I know it's fraught because we're still in a global pandemic, but like on a nice day, put them outside by the curb with a sign that says take some comics. Redistribute them to your community. What if other people around you want to read some comics for free and wouldn't otherwise?
They can reach in there and grab whatever hasn't started burning.
Nicholas.
But this is the thing, though. I think that Jeff is getting. I think he's aware that, like, you know, you can recycle this stuff. Honestly, do it. If you just want to get the stuff out of your house, do that. I know that comic fans, everyone's clutching their pearls right now. I understand, but go ahead, recycle it. They are recyclable paper, right? But I think what Jeff is really trying to get at is like, how do I take these things that I've spent time and I've put love and care into, just keeping in boxes at home, and I don't want to recycle them. Is there a good way, or the best way, or what is the best way to distribute them back into the comics community, right? And my first thought is, like, honestly, package them up into like distributable groups and give them away for free, and just make whoever wants them pay for shipping, right? Say you've got all of the Dan Slott Amazing Spider-Man run. That's just the first thing I think of, which is like, 80, 90, 120 issues, something like that. Put them all in plastic and wrap them up in tape, put them in boxes, and just say, hey, these are not going to be perfect, but I will send them to you for free as long as you pay the shipping, right? And I think that's the best way to do it. Like, find a place like a Discord or Twitter or Reddit or something, and just say like, hey, these are free comics. They're not going to be in the great shape, but if you want to own them, so I no longer have to, I'll send them to you. That to me is like the ideal way to get rid of that stuff. Sometimes, it's not everyone's going to want the Mask issues number 1 through 4 that I bought from Dark Horse, which is like a garbage series, and I get that. So it is tough.
Here's my other thought that I thought of just now. We're only a few months away from Free Comic Book Day, at least in the States. I don't know if that's a global thing. Go to your local comic shop and say, hey, can I donate you my books on the stipulation that you give them out for free on Free Comic Book Day? Or see if you can do something with that. Or I'm sure there's other comic fans in your area who have this same issue. Maybe your local comic shop, if they're nice and community minded behind the counter, can do something like, on Free Comic Book Day, everyone can set up with their free stuff and we can have like a swap or something like that.
Yeah. Some places do that. I know there are other comic shops that are like, we don't take any comics from anybody. Like, we just don't. We don't do rebuys. We don't do, even to give away for free. Like,
sounds like a tough guy thing. We don't take comic books from anybody, especially you.
Well, I only say that because I know some shops, especially looking at like Free Comic Book Day, Kara, because I think that's actually a really good idea. Like, go to your comic shop and be like, hey, with this date, can I just give away my books? I'm not asking you to distribute them, not asking you to do anything. I will just put them out and just mark them for free, because that's an option. But I also will say, I went to a comic book shop after the last Free Comic Book Day, and maybe, during the pandemic it's a little bit different than non-pandemic times, but they still had stacks of free books. So my worry is that you bring them to this shop and then they're kind of just stuck with some comics. That might be a problem.
Well, that's why you go there and say hey, I'll come here. I'll stand by my books. At the end of the day, I'll take back whatever's not there.
Yeah.
Or see if the local,
that's true.
or see if the local library is just going to be like, hey, can I give you these floppies? Just put them out like you put out magazines, and people can just take them,
I can just imagine the shop handcuffing you to the desk, and they'll be like, yeah, I'm going to hold you to this. You're not going anywhere.
I'm only laughing because I'm only laughing because I could totally see some comic shop owners doing that. It's like, you will not leave this shop until your books go with you.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and that's a realistic problem for these shops, right? Is that they've got so limited space because the profit margins for comics and stuff is so slim. It's like they can't afford to keep, take another long box or two of comics, And I totally feel Jeff's pain here. How do you get rid of massive amounts of comic books at once? And it's a big question. I donated mine to my local comic book club at my university that I started. I'm pretty sure that those got thrown away or people just took them all home eventually. But the goal was just to get long boxes out of my house, and that I somehow did that.
Well, I think one of the most interesting parts of Jeff's question is when he says, how can we as people who appreciate the medium of graphic storytelling also find the balance of not consuming while also supporting our local businesses?
God, Jeff, you just want it all. Greedy little Jeff.
If you're going to support a local business, you are going to be a consumer. So the question is then, what do you are you okay with just buying some comics, knowing that you're contributing to your local economy, and then taking them home and deciding some of these I'll keep, some of these I'll recycle, some of them I've got a friend, I think they'll be interested in this. Honestly, that's what I did the most recent time. I went to my local comic shop. I got a stack of floppies. I over the course of a few months, I would pick one up every now and again and be like, oh, it's really nice to have just a one-issue comic book. And not everything is because most of the books I buy at this point are here's a very nice hardbound edition of this book that I can put on my bookcase and never look at ever again. But I just like knowing it's there. And sometimes I just have a floppy and be like, okay, I read this. This is not the best thing I've ever read in my life. I'm just going to throw it in recycling. Or one of them is oh, I actually liked this issue. Let me hold on to this and maybe I'll revisit it. And then in a year or two, if I actually haven't looked at it, maybe I'll recycle it at that point. But again, changing the mentality of, oh my God, what if this turns out to be a collector's edition? Spoiler alert, it's not. You don't have Action Comics #1. The comic that you buy is not going to significantly appreciate. Hold on to it if it means something to you. But if not, if it's taking up space, I don't think you should feel bad about just getting rid of them.
Yeah, I Nick, we haven't heard from you for a minute. I mean, like, what are some of your thoughts on this? I don't know
Sure.
if you've struggled with, like, how do I handle all of the books that I've got? Because, like, I definitely feel that pain, but I'm curious to know what you're thinking about this.
I mean, obviously, people have posited a couple different solutions here. I think another alternative idea is to just leave a stack out in the woods, so that the hunters who are like, oh, look, I found a stack of Playboys, are like, what the fuck is Green Arrow at World's End #3? And are there any boobs in this? Answers, there are no boobs in this. So that's another option.
Sure.
I mean, all joking aside, like, I get it. It's I think when I was thinking about this topic the last couple days, something that sort of came to mind is that obviously there are certain binaries and spectrums that we think about with comics. One, of course, being like, are you a real comics fan versus a not real comics fan, which is shitty and that shouldn't exist. But then I think there's another one that's sort of I've been thinking about recently, which is like are you a sort of a true comics fan, or like a real vested one in terms of like, are you buying singles? Are you buying local? Are you collecting full runs? Do you have a big pull? Do you support the shop in other ways?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is another kind of not real healthy way of thinking about fandom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that, Jeff was largely talking about shops, but I do think it is important to say that, like, help the comic book industry grow and flourish in, whatever way that means for you. If that means you're buying digital, that's fine. If it means that you're using Hoopla, if it means you're using Libby, your local library, those also send messages to your local library or your app about what's in demand for you. And that sends those libraries or apps to go and purchase more items akin to what you're interested in, which of course benefits the industry further. So, don't think you're a bad comic book fan just because you don't live near a shop, or because you don't have an extensive physical pull, or because maybe you're forced to buy your trades from Barnes and Noble instead of an independent bookseller. I get the guilt of feeling like you maybe don't do that or you can't do that, but don't feel that way. There are other options.
Well, it's interesting that when you said just now that, like, don't feel guilty about it. I do think guilt is a huge part of this for a lot of comic fans, because we are, like, those of us who read floppies or like pay attention to the newest graphic novels that aren't necessarily like a film tie-in. I do think there is this sense of almost of obligation that's like, oh, so few people read actual comic books. I am keeping the industry afloat by paying for these books. And if I don't do it, the whole thing will collapse. And it's like,
right.
Yeah, buddy, that's capitalism. But you don't have to buy it. You don't have to literally buy into it if you can't afford it, if it's not serving you anymore, if you decide you don't like the book anymore. Like,
and there's no denying that, like, and coming from someone who was unemployed for a period there, and who had to call my shop multiple times and be like, you know what, sorry, like, I've got to close down more of my pull, I've got to cut more of my pull. Like, my physical pull at this point is very small, but it's that whole process began because I had to cut it. There's no denying that if you buy into the idea that you should have a sizable pull at a local shop, and you're buying books in floppy form when they launch, there's no effective way of doing that at an affordable level. It just doesn't exist. You're going to spend more money than the person who prefers to trade wait, or someone like me who knows that if I wait 2 months to buy a Dark Horse issue digitally, I can pay half price. Same thing goes for Image. So it's a more expensive model, and so people shouldn't feel like that is the model that is ideal, the one that belongs on a pedestal, the one that makes you someone who's truly keeping the industry afloat. So I I do think that's important.
Yeah.
I think another important part of what Jeff's asking about here with like the comic book industry, I think especially the big two having a lot of event books where there are all these tie-ins and one-shots, you know, like Mike and Paul and I recently talked about Final Crisis and like yelling about all those tie-ins. And it's like, I love Star Wars, but the second I saw War of the Bounty Hunters was going to be an event, I lost all interest and I haven't read any of it because I'm just like, oh, you're doing the thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be part of that. So for me, like, I don't think this was necessarily the healthiest response, but I hit a point with event books around 2010 where I was just like, I am not interested in events. I'm going to read more self-contained books. I'm going to read shorter runs of acclaimed series. Like if it's an event, I am just not interested because I hate that you're making me feel this way. And like that was my response, for better or for worse.
Well, and it's tough. And I will say for folks that are listening, Jeff did give us a little bit more information, like in our Discord chat about this. And he talked specifically about like dropping Spider-Man because of issues with changing writers and all that other stuff. But he felt the obligation, like, how do I then replace that? And so on and so forth. But like, Kara, to your point, like it's weird that, you know, especially when it comes to like a physical, you know, purchase, right? Ending up having to buy like random one-off issues of comics that you weren't even interested in. Like if I didn't want to read the I don't know, IG-88 one shot that maybe came out as part of that.
Don't bring that into this. Don't bring that into this. Find another example.
I don't know.
That one's not
Dengar.
acceptable.
Something, or I don't know, any of the Star Wars characters, you know, any of the tie-ins that were quote unquote required reading for the event, you suddenly end up with a bunch of quote unquote collectible items at your house that you don't even want anymore, right? And so how do you reconcile with like, yeah, I wanted to read this story, I wanted to support my shop, and I also wanted to be clued in with the storyline, but I don't want to have to own this physical thing. And I think the alternative here would be like, well, then just buy them digitally. But then you run into this collector's mentality of like the cognitive dissonance of like, well, I own the whole story in physical except for these couple of issues. And you kind of start to scratch this or get this weird itch of like, well, it doesn't feel complete. And it's because we built up this collector's mentality. And Jeff pointed it out in his bit about this, about like how collecting books becomes a collectible hobby experience when it's just a story, right? Would you ever look at the books that you buy for paperback prose and be like, that's a collectible, you know? Like, no, you just see them as books. And I think the problem is that we've created this mentality. I know we talked about it already, but that all of these things are supposed to be treated as precious. And I really think we have to get away from that. Like what should be treated as precious is, I think, the way that, you know, like the special edition graphic novels, to be like, that's the precious thing, not the throwaway stories that you weren't sure. Like we should be looking at single issues as like, these are all just testing to see what's good and what's bad. And then the final, like what survives out of what's popular based off of some other way, it shouldn't just be sales, is what ends up getting like the deluxe edition of the collector's blah, 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 blah. And those are the things that should be cherished because they are in like precisely put together with high value, everything, paper and backing and all that other stuff. And it's, I don't know, it's tough because we want to support all of these books. This to touch on a point that we mentioned before, you know, we say we want to support these books. We want to make sure the numbers go up. We feel like the comic book industry sits on our shoulders. And I felt that pain for many, many years. I still feel it like to this day, because when you talk to creators, they say, buy my book, otherwise it's not going to survive. And they don't say it like that, but that is the implication, right? If the numbers don't reflect what they want to, you know, what a publisher wants for a book to succeed, then that book's going to go away. So we feel this pressure on us as readers to be like, well, I like this book, so I better buy it. I better buy it twice.
Yeah.
I want to make sure this book survives.
Multiple copies.
And it sucks because like at the end of the day, we actually aren't the people, like the people who are buying comics aren't the actual people that make that happen when it comes to physical copies, because your comic book shop had to order a certain number of copies, you know,
3 months before it even comes out. So you have to make a bet. You can't return those books. So if you're a shop owner, you're making a bet 3 months out that people are going to buy the book from you that you have ordered at the direct market price. So really the comic book publishers are selling to the shop owners, and the shop owners are trying to do their best based off of what they know about their customers. But if you have a customer base that's not like, I'm following Twitter and I'm getting the diamond order code from the creator that I love who's posting it so I can tell my LCS that they need to order this book. Like nobody, like a very small percentage of people are actually like engaged enough to be doing that. So it's really like the shop owners are independently deciding what's going to be available at their shop based on what sells. And what sells for a lot of comic book shops is the events and the tie-ins, or the shops want to order like X number of issues so they can get the variant cover that they can then sell on eBay at a markup. Like it's complicated. It's really rough. This is like,
so to bring this, I feel like we've done a lot of issues or episodes about like the local comic shop experience. Not to completely cut you off, Kara, but like to bring it back to Jeff's point, it's like if you want to support your shop, then pre-order or order collected editions, order special, like order things from your shop as you want them, not to, I don't know, try to push away that FOMO feeling, I guess. I don't know. So I totally went in a different direction. So I did not mean to, Kara. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Because the big pieces of this question to me feel like, what do I do with all this guilt and sense of obligation that I'm feeling about this industry that I love, but is super
or just
flawed?
in general about life? Yeah.
Nick. And the
I read between the lines, Jeff.
And the concept of comics, we've been trained to view them as collectibles, even if they're just something that we read and decide that that was not something we want to read again. And then we feel, but I can't throw it away because it's a comic. I can't throw it away. And it's really hard to overcome that. And that collectability mentality, Mike was saying we got additional context on this question from Jeff on our Discord. And one of the things he adds is like kind of a throwaway, but I think is sort of central to this collectability mentality, is he said, quote, and now we're adding in how digital comics are going to NFTs for their collectability, unquote. Like this problem is just transferring formats. It's still this idea of, but I need to have in my hands this physical item that I am told is valuable, and I don't necessarily feel that way, but what if it is valuable? Or like, what if one day it becomes valuable?
But why does it need to be valuable?
Yeah.
Right? Like why does a thing that brings you joy from reading have to have any value beyond just the experience of reading it, right? And this is me getting mad at the concept, right? Saying, because I get mad at myself about this, thinking that all of these things were so collectible and so needed to keep in pristine condition. You got to bag and board them and make sure they're in a good, like, to what end? Am I gonna sell them? And if I'm gonna sell them, to who wants to buy them, right? And the NFT portion of this, I know we've talked about NFTs a lot on the show recently. The NFT thing also ties into this in saying that the only way that those things have quote unquote value and that you can earn money off of them beyond just paying exactly what you originally paid for it is if there's somebody out there willing to pay more money for it, right? And that's where, when it comes to like your single issues that you've got sitting in boxes that are bagged and board or slabbed or whatever the fuck you did with them to try to preserve them, the only way that they have value is if there's someone else out there who was willing to pay more than what you paid for it, right? And that market does not exist for the most part for most books. I think that there are dozens and if not hundreds of stories out there where this has happened, but they don't happen to regular people, right? Like the comic book industry is what, like maximum 80,000 people buying single issue comics, right? Maybe 100,000. That's it in the United States.
I think it was like 100,000,
including digital. I don't know.
No, what's that? I'm totally blanking on that box, that like nerdy box that bought like 100K issues.
Loot box.
Yeah,
loot box. Loot crate.
Yeah, Loot Crate is like 180,000.
Where they would just artificially
like that, right?
Fuck up the numbers for certain books. Yeah.
But like that's a low number, and that made headlines because that was a high number for the comics industry. So it's like Mike said, this is a super tiny market when you really think about it.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm meandering all over Jeff's questions because there's a lot of things to say about this, but like the collectability, it should not. in my mind, it's taken me a long time to unlearn the idea that anything that I buy is going to be a quote unquote valuable collectible.
Yep.
Right. At this point, I'm buying comics for my own personal collection of like, I buy number ones of books all the time that I think that I've already read, like, or that I've bought digitally, right? Like Monkey Meat number one. I have a copy of that physically because one day I would love to meet Junie Ba and I would love to get it signed. That's it. That's the only reason I kept it. I don't think I'm going to resell it. I just want to be able to say, look, I got a signed edition of this book. That's pretty much how I view my physical comic book purchases of floppies nowadays, is like, I want to own this for my own collection because I read it and it was so impactful and meaningful. So I go to my local comic book shop and I will pay a premium to support that shop because I'm not a regular buyer from them, right? I don't have a big pull list with them. If I do, it's like 2 or 3 books, but I do buy like all my graphic novels and all that other stuff to them. And that's how I try to fix this problem of I want to support the industry, but I can't do it in the way that is the, I don't know, preferred method. Because at the end of the day, let me tell you a little bit of a secret. Every comic shop person that I've talked to probably over the last 5 to 6 years has switched from floppies to collections. Like, the majority of their purchases are collections and not floppies because they understand this issue of floppies aren't actually the thing you want to collect. Floppies aren't the thing when you say, man, I want to reread East of West. I'm not going to go pick up my East of West floppies. I'm going to go read the collection because it's so much easier to handle. So at the end of the day, does that mean that those floppies are worth nothing? Absolutely not. Keep them, because if those books meant something to you, you should hold on to them for dear life because they are important to you. And you can, at the end of the day, hold that badge of honor for yourself and say, I've got this thing. But that does not mean that they're going to have any value beyond personal value, you know? And I think that's how we should treat floppies for the most part. But that's me.
Yeah. I edited my floppy collection maybe like 5 or 6 years ago at this point. And like I had kept every book that I bought in high school and college when I was at like my peak of local comic shop book consumption. And I had like multiple long boxes and I was looking through them and I was just like, when am I going to read these again? So I went through everything. I went through everything.
No, that's the question. That is the best question to ask yourself about when you're trying to figure out how to deal with all your single issues is, when am I going to read these again? And which ones would I actually want to open up and read individually one by one?
Well, it's not even that. Like, so my entire, like, all the floppies that I own right now are in like 3 short boxes. And when I was like going through everything and deciding what to keep, I was like, all right, what did I really enjoy reading that I could see myself reading again, even if it's like 10 years in the future? What is worth the amount of money I'm paying for the real estate that I live in? And like, what is probably not going to be collected in a trade? So like some of my favorite series that I was reading in the mid 2000s were things like Shadow Pact at DC, which was all about their magic users. Besides like a first volume of their first 5 issues, that shit's never been collected. So I kind of knew that. Like I was like, I'm probably the only person who's like enjoying this as much as I am. So I held on to all of those because I really like that series, and I'm like, I could not see it ever really being collected unless they do like a digital PDF dump at some point. So for me, I was like, I want the physical copy of that. That meant a lot to me, and it's not going to be collected in trade.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's tough. And I think that probably a lot of people listening to this show have very different opinions about this. I think that we at IRCB are all very like, I don't know, against the idea of the collectability of comic books and stuff and the valuation of comics.
Well, sure, because it goes somewhat hand in hand with speculation.
Yeah, and I think the speculator market is like very unhealthy for the physical comic book product, because at the end of the day, who's buying those comics? Is it people that actually want to read them, or is it people that are just trying to resell them? I mean, one of the crazy thoughts that I had in my head is like, if you want to participate in your local comic book shop community and your local economy and stuff, maybe see if they have a program where you can like just say, hey, I want to give you guys like a $50 gift certificate for someone that comes in and maybe they can't afford more books than they actually want, and just, I want to pay for them in advance, like get more comics into the hands of people that actually want to read them. you know? I don't know, something like that, like buy gift cards for people, you know, somebody that, or, you know, spend money in the shop in a way that isn't necessarily taking something home. If you really want to put money into the economy. But yeah, I don't know.
In our Discord live chat, Danny said, but how do I throw away art? Which I think is also part of this, because you know how friggin' long it takes a penciler and an inker to do their work on a page, for a colorist and flatter to do their work. Like, and my response to how do you throw away art, once you have purchased the book, you have helped financially support the artist. And if there is a piece of art that you like, I'm about to ever talk about pearl clutching. Guys, I tore a cover off a comic book the other day. I tore the cover off.
Hold on. Episode's over. Hold on.
I tore the cover off of a Batman Adventures issue because I read the story and I was like, this is super cute, but I don't think I'm going to see myself like rereading this again. Like, it's fine. I read it. I enjoyed it. Whatever. The cover is like a super cute Bruce Wayne in his little bat outfit with his mask off, and he's drinking a cup of tea that Alfred has just brought him, and it's the most wholesome thing. I tore that shit off so fast, and I'm just gonna, I don't even know what I'm gonna do with it yet. I might frame it, I might put it in like a scrapbook, I might just hold on to it in a little box and like find it when I'm cleaning my room one day and just be like, aw. But like, if you like a piece of art in a comic book, cut it out, tear it off.
I love that idea. I love that idea.
Decoupage a coffee table. Make a scrapbook of your favorite comic art.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's clearly more to be said about this, but I'm curious if you guys have any final thoughts here, because we probably should wrap up. This is the longest episode ever. Nick, any last thoughts about this whole ordeal?
Yeah, I mean, sort of just touch on what's sort of been brought up right now. I think part of the whole issue here is that comic books are just something that's now been coded as collectibles. That's just the way it is. And we say, you know, Danny, you know, not to make this personal, right? You said, how can I throw away art? I mean, if you look at like a magazine, right, like the New Yorker or something of that sort, that's just filled with all sorts of, you know, pieces of art that have been, you know, commissioned, or paintings that have been, you know, done, or graphic art throughout the whole thing that have, you know, been commissioned for the magazine, and we throw that out every month. But comic books have just been coded forever as collectibles, which is hilarious, because we now think of them as collectibles because we thought at one point that they were worth a lot of money, and they only became worth a lot of money because back in the 30s and 40s, there were pages in them where your kid colored in the page or tore out the page and sent in the form for the decoder ring, or it just got thrown away in the trash. And so they only became valuable because at one point they were a disposable item. And now we're forever stuck with this idea that they're a valuable item, even though everybody who gets comic books now, or a lot of them, think that it's a valuable item. So they're all holding on to their comics. And so nothing will ever be worth anything, I think.
Yeah.
That is how supply and demand works, Nick. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm still figuring economics out. All right. It's just,
I was going to say, this has been macroeconomics with I Read Comic Books.
I got a 4 on that AP test. Thank you very much. I did just fine. I'm just kidding. I think support for the comic book industry is support for the comic book industry, and obviously not including Pirate Bay and all of the other things that are quote unquote support, right? So I mean, for me personally, you know, I started with trades and I moved to singles, and now I'm just at a point where space wise, the idea of even thinking about it just makes me anxious, you know, bagging, boarding, the idea of maybe even grading or slabbing a book, getting storage shelves, filling them up, making sure that it's stored in a place in the house that has inadequate humidity, that's plus or minus 50. Like, this used to be things that I would keep track of, and it's mentally taxing. And for me, when I look at a lot of those long boxes now, it just stresses me out, because I know that if I'm going to read those books again, I'm going to pull up my digital copy, because then I don't have to find the box and I don't have to put it back. and I don't have to wash my hands so I don't get my oils onto the book, and I don't have to worry when I open it up that I'm going to attach the tape to the comic or the tape is going to turn into goo and, whatever. Like, maybe that's just me, but these things fucking stress me out, and it's part of the reason, like, I have done.
an anxiety clutch on my heart right now with you describing the risk of the tape attaching itself to the book when you're removing it from the sleeve. Like, why?
Yeah.
Life's too short.
This is why I'm mostly done with single issues. Is it's like I already get anxious about so many other things in my day-to-day life. Comic books is such a wide spectrum of like collector's anxiety, preservation anxiety, things that if you find other ways to support the industry and you find yourself psychologically burdened by these sorts of things, don't hesitate to find ways to get that out of your life.
Yeah, I think all of us have approached this from a range of professional and anecdotal personal experience with how this journey has been different for all of us. So I know it's super unhelpful to just be like, do what's best for you. But I think this is something that everybody has to just like sit with yourself and think, okay, do I really enjoy this aspect of collecting? Do I really have the space for this? Do I really have the time? Do I really have the money? Am I buying this because I feel obligated or because I actually want to and am interested in? I don't think you have to go to a local comic shop for absolutely every little thing if you don't actually want to buy every little thing and are just buying it to support your shop. Like, that's lovely, but that's not ultimately helpful to either of you, because if you're buying things out of a sense of an obligation, how does the comic shop owner know what you're actually interested in buying and can then calibrate what they're buying from the publishers to give you the best experience? And if you are trying to figure out just like how to support people in the industry in general, like, yeah, it takes more work, but like, look at what the creators you like are posting on social media. A lot of creators are very vocal about where you can buy their stuff in the way that like gives them the biggest cut or just like supports them in the way that they think is best. Once the pandemic dies down, fingers crossed, comic conventions will be another thing where you can actually buy things directly from the creators. Like, there are so many different ways of thinking about this. It's not one size fits all. And you really just have to come back to like, how do I feel about this? Can I afford this? Do I have the space? Do I actually want to collect things, or do I just feel I have to collect things?
Yeah, no, these are all great points. My last thought here would be, I mean, honestly, it should not be on you to have to figure out how to support your local economy.
Yeah, why is this you?
It's no.
Why is this just
exactly.
you? Yeah.
Here's the thing, and it's not about like the individual, right? It is not on anybody that should have to figure out like, how do I support my local comic? The problem is that like the comic book industry is kind of fucked, right? Like, in terms of how it actually treats its primary distributors of comics, right?
Structure and organization, yeah.
It's not on you to say like, I need to save this thing. It is on the businesses themselves. And that's like a real fucking Mike's a big old capitalist with a capital C like mindset of it. But like, honestly, we need to restructure the way that we distribute comic books to people, period. That being said, we do have to live in the world that we live in. So I would say, to, echoing Kara's point of like, buy what you want to buy. And it's not on you to try to save your local comic shop. If you need to get rid of books, give them away for free, sell them to people for shipping. Like I said before,
burn them in your yard.
Or recycle them. Honestly, if you don't want them, you don't have to keep them. Even if it is quote unquote art, keep the ones that you want. Even if it's just one issue out of an 80 issue run. So what? What's the pain there? That's my final thought about it.
Some of the issues that I was getting rid of when I was doing my big purge, I cut out pictures that I thought were cool, and I have a little box of those, and I'm like, one day I'll make a craft with these. Like, there's other ways of enjoying the aesthetics of the comic book that's not just like the sacred tome must never be besmirched.
I do like that Kara swapped the delusion of one day I'll read this for one day this will be part of a project. I think that's I mean, I'm not calling you out, Kara, but I do love that it was like one delusion of grandeur that just got replaced with another one, which
Nick,
if
what is
that's
life?
not life, what is? Yeah.
If not a
Yeah,
series
yeah.
of delusions of grandeur, what would we all be without our aspirations?
Interchangeable delusions, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you guys for the discussion, and thank you, Jeff, again for supporting us on Patreon at that tier, at the $10 tier. Thank you for being part of the IRCB Inner Circle. This was an amazing topic that I think we could have gone on for another hour today with, but I'm going to wrap things up here. Next week's episode is going to be me and Renee. We're going to be joined by our good friend Gabe Cheng to talk about comic books. He's got a new Kickstarter coming out, which I'm excited about, but we're going to do a big old no topic episode again and just chat about comics with Gabe. It's going to be a lot of fun. As always, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Kara at KaraSSam. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rapin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. You can join today for access to such exclusive series as IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. You can join now at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast.
Celebrate my birthday by rating and reviewing our show 5 stars on Apple Podcast, Spotify. Yes, they have ratings, or wherever you listen to podcasts, because I definitely deserve it. Do it for me, guys. 5 stars everywhere you listen.
Please.
We would also love it if you joined the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. There's a link to our Discord in the show notes.
Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop, we've been talking about them a lot today, about I Read Comic Books.
Yeah, you could definitely tell them how I said, fuck them, the capitalist society that... Just kidding. I love comic book shops. It's just the industry's broken. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. We can't thank them enough. They have been gracious to let us use their music for so many years. Zander is a very cool guy who edits our show every week, and real sorry about this.
I was going to say, maybe not after this week. This might be his last go round.
I want to say thank you to Nick and Kara for being on this episode with me. Double extra thanks to Jeff for commissioning this episode. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Danny for hanging out with us live, and thank you to everyone out there who listens to the show and supports us. You are fantastic human beings. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.